My name is Caleb Warren, I'm 32 years old, and I restore historic churches for a living. I rebuild what time and people destroy. But nothing prepared me for what I saw inside my grandfather's church the night his will went missing. It had been 3 months since his funeral. The candles were out, the pews cold. I was fixing a cracked window above the altar when the pipe organ suddenly started playing, slow, trembling notes from his favorite hymn. No one was sitting there, no movement, just the sound echoing off the walls like a memory that refused to die. Everyone said the will was lost, or never existed. But that melody, it wasn't random. Grandpa was a man of signs, and I knew somehow he was trying to tell me where to look. That's the night everything changed, when I stopped being the quiet grandson and became the man who uncovered a secret my family buried in the name of greed. Before I take you into what really happened, tell me, where are you watching this from right now? And if you believe truth always finds a voice, subscribe. Because this one, it started with silence and an organ that played by itself. Everyone stared at me like I'd stolen the dead man's pen. Their eyes burned through me as if grief gave them the right to accuse. Aunt Lila whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe Caleb misplaced it. Or maybe he knows where it is." I tried to speak, but every word felt heavier than the air inside that church. My grandfather's will had vanished, and somehow I had become the suspect. Pastor Reed shuffled behind his desk, pretending to rearrange papers. "Sometimes documents get misplaced during transitions," he murmured. His voice trembled. The man had baptized me when I was a boy, but tonight he couldn't even look me in the eyes. I opened the old donation ledger lying on his desk. Next to my name, written in faded blue ink, were the words, "Pending bequest." My stomach knotted. Why was my name there at all? I hadn't donated a dime. Outside the office, the church was silent except for the faint hum of rain against stained glass. I walked toward the organ, the same one Grandpa used to play on Sunday mornings. I remember his hands, rough, steady, filled with patience. I knelt to adjust one of the broken pedals, more out of habit than curiosity. That's when I saw it. A torn page of sheet music, folded tight, tucked beneath the pedals like someone hid it there on purpose. The initials JWC were scrawled in the corner in Grandpa's exact handwriting. My heart pounded. I slipped the paper into my pocket, glancing over my shoulder to make sure no one saw. Maybe this church didn't just lose its will. Maybe it was protecting something. As I turned to leave, the air shifted, cold, heavy, almost electric. Then, without anyone near it, the organ let out a single deep note, one drawn-out sound that echoed through the sanctuary. It was the same note Grandpa always ended his favorite hymn with, the one he called his Amen. And in that moment, I knew someone or something wanted me to keep looking. The melody was wrong. Someone had rewritten grace. I knew every hymn in that church by heart. Grandpa made sure of it. But when I flipped open the old hymn book stored behind the organ, one verse didn't belong. Instead of lyrics, 3 numbers were written across the page in careful ink. 3 11 19. I ran my finger over them. They weren't random. They were deliberate, like coordinates hiding in plain sight. Sister May appeared in the doorway, her frail hands clutching a basket of folded linens. She'd served this church longer than anyone alive. Her eyes narrowed when she saw what I was holding. "Some notes," she whispered, "aren't meant for mortal hands." I almost laughed, but something in her voice froze me. She crossed herself and backed away, the sound of her rosary beads clicking against her wrist as she muttered a prayer. Later that day, I met with Mr. Harlan, the family lawyer. His office smelled like paper and old dust. I asked again about the will. He didn't even look up. "Jonas Warren died intestate," he said flatly. There was no will. Then what about the ledger entry marked pending bequest? I pressed. He sighed. "You're chasing ghosts, Caleb. Let the dead rest." But I couldn't. Ghosts don't forge numbers into hymn books. Back at the church, I noticed an old box on the donation counter. Inside were broken candles, a few coins, and something heavier. I pulled it out carefully, an antique fountain pen, engraved in gold letters. Property of J.W. The cap cracked open with a soft click. The dried ink at the nib had hardened into faint ridges. 3 tiny lines, then 1, then 19 dots carved like someone had pressed too hard, writing those same numbers by hand. I set the pen against the hymn book. The sequence aligned perfectly. My pulse quickened. Grandpa had written those numbers himself. I stood in the empty sanctuary, staring at the pews lit by the late afternoon sun. Row after row, stretching toward the altar. 3, 11, 19. They weren't dates. They weren't codes. They were directions. I looked down the aisle and whispered under my breath, "You hid it here, didn't you, Grandpa? Somewhere in this church between the wood and the faith, he'd left his truth buried for me to find." And the numbers were pointing me exactly where to start digging. Pew 3, row 11, hymn book 19. Row 3, pew 11, hymn book 19. It wasn't scripture. It was a map. The church was empty when I returned that night. Moonlight spilled through the stained glass, painting red and gold streaks across the wooden aisle. My footsteps echoed like whispers from another time. I stopped at pew 3, ran my hand across the smooth wood, then crouched to check the space beneath. My heart drummed louder than the silence. I pulled out the 19th hymn book, dust rising around it. Tucked beneath it was a small square of white cloth, delicate and yellowed at the edges. It was an embroidered handkerchief, the initials stitched in fading blue thread. R. L. My breath caught. Grandpa's first wife, Rose Lillian Warren. She died before I was born, but her portrait still hung in the church hallway. Everyone said Grandpa never got over her death. Why would something of hers be hidden here decades later? As I turned it over, something thin slipped out and fluttered onto the floor. A bank receipt. I unfolded it carefully. Withdrawal, $10,000. Date, 1 day before Jonas Warren's funeral. The signature on the bottom made my hands shake. Pastor Reed. I sank onto the pew, the weight of it pressing into my chest. Why would a pastor withdraw that much cash right before a funeral? And why hide the evidence here, under my grandfather's favorite seat? The sound of footsteps snapped me out of my thoughts. "Caleb?" A sharp voice cut through the air. It was Carla, my cousin. She stood in the aisle, her phone raised halfway like she'd caught me stealing from the offering box. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone dripping with accusation. "Digging for treasure?" I tucked the handkerchief and receipt into my jacket. "Just cleaning up," I said flatly. She smirked. "Sure, I'll tell everyone you found something interesting. Maybe they'll believe you this time." Her heels clicked away, every step spreading poison before I could stop her. I stayed long after she left, staring at the altar. The church felt different now, alive, almost watching. The candles flickered without wind. As I turned to leave, the main door slammed shut with a deafening crack. My pulse shot through me. I ran to it, yanking it open, but no one was outside. Just a pale fog and the sound of distant thunder. Then I saw it. A single folded sheet of paper slid halfway under the doorframe, like someone had pushed it from the other side. I bent down and picked it up. It wasn't a letter. It was a hand-drawn floor plan of the church. And on the bottom corner, in faint pencil, 3 words chilled me to the bone. "You're getting close." Grandpa's handwriting was all angles and mercy. This drawing had neither. The lines on the floor plan were harsh, mechanical, like someone wanted to erase warmth from the place that once held it. I laid the paper out across a pew under my flashlight, tracing every pencil stroke. At the edge near the choir loft was a shape I'd never noticed before. A sealed crawl space, boxed off from the rest of the blueprint. Grandpa built this church himself in his younger days. He didn't leave spaces without purpose. I climbed the narrow staircase behind the choir stands, the boards creaking beneath my boots. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight like ash suspended in time. Behind the hymn cabinet, a section of wall didn't match. The wood was newer, nailed over something older. My palms were sweating by the time I wedged a screwdriver into the seam and pried it open. The wood groaned like it resented being disturbed. A rush of stale air hit my face, heavy with mildew and candle smoke. Inside the small cavity, half buried under dust, something glinted. I reached in and pulled out a brass keychain. Its tag was engraved with neat professional letters. Confessional Number 2. My throat tightened. The church only had 2 confessionals, and number 2 had been sealed shut for years, under renovation, according to Pastor Reed. Nobody had questioned it. Not until now. I slipped the keychain into my pocket just as footsteps echoed down the hall. Heavy. Urgent. "Caleb!" Pastor Reed's voice cracked through the quiet. His flashlight swung toward me, slicing the dark. "What are you doing up here?" I froze, the loose board still hanging from one nail. "I found something," I said, trying to sound steady. He stepped closer, eyes darting to the open cavity. When he saw the disturbed dust, the color drained from his face. "Give me what you found," he said softly, but the softness wasn't kindness. It was the fear of wearing a mask. I took a step back. "What's in confessional 2, Pastor?" "You don't understand," he whispered. "There are things better left untouched." "Like a man's last will?" His jaw tightened. "That's enough." For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the wind pressing against the stained glass. Then he reached out his hand, not pleading, but commanding. "That key belongs to the church." I slipped the key deeper into my pocket and turned toward the stairs. Maybe, but so did Grandpa's truth. He didn't follow me, but his voice carried as I descended. "If you open that door, you won't like what you find." The sanctuary was dark when I reached the confessional hallway. The silence pressed on my chest like a weight. I found the wooden door marked with a faded brass number 2. My fingers trembled as I fit the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, almost too easily. The hinges moaned in protest as the door cracked open. Inside, wedged between stacks of old prayer slips, glimmered the edge of a blood-red envelope, its wax seal glinting in the dim light. And even before I touched it, I knew whatever was inside had been hidden out of fear, not faith. It smelled like cedar and guilt. The envelope was thick, sealed with deep red wax that had melted unevenly across the flap. My hands shook as I pulled it free from the prayer slips. The church was silent, too silent. Even the air felt heavy, as if the walls were listening. I broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter inside. The ink had bled at the edges, the handwriting shaky but unmistakable. Pastor Reed's. "To whom it may concern," it began. "I have placed Jonas Warren's will in the church safe for safekeeping. It was his wish to keep peace among the living until tempers cooled. The family must not." The line ended abruptly. The bottom half of the page was ripped clean away. My chest tightened. The tear wasn't accidental. It was too precise, the edges too straight. Someone wanted the confession without the consequence. I read the letter 3 more times, each word heavier than the last. Reed had locked the real will in the church safe. The safe that, according to him, didn't exist anymore. The same man who told me to stop digging. A chill crawled up my spine. I turned the envelope over. The church seal, the old circular emblem Jonas had designed when he built the place, was printed faintly across the back, but half of it was burned away. Someone had tried to destroy it. I slipped both the letter and the envelope into my jacket. My hands smelled faintly of the wax, like burnt cedar and dust. The door creaked behind me and I nearly dropped the papers. "Caleb!" Pastor Reed's voice carried softly from the shadows. His silhouette stood at the edge of the aisle, half in light, half in dark. "You were right," I said, holding up the envelope. It wasn't lost. He took one hesitant step forward. "Where did you find that?" "In the confessional. Hidden between prayer slips. Signed by you." He froze. His voice cracked. "That's impossible. I never wrote such a thing." "Then someone forged your handwriting perfectly," I snapped. "And they knew where to hide it." His breathing grew shallow. "Caleb, you're meddling in things that can hurt people you love." "I already am people I love," I said quietly. "And one of them is dead." He didn't reply. The silence between us felt sharp enough to cut. When I turned to leave, he whispered almost to himself. I tried to keep the peace. But peace built on lies is just silence wearing perfume. Outside, the night air felt too cold, like the world itself was recoiling from what I'd found. I drove straight home, the envelope sitting beside me on the passenger seat, its torn seal catching every flicker of streetlight. Inside my Uncle Luke's house, a faint glow flickered in the fireplace. He'd been burning old paperwork again, or so he said. I stepped closer, pretending to warm my hands. Among the ashes sat a half-burned wax seal, the same deep red, the same church insignia, identical to the one I'd just found. And suddenly I knew the letter hadn't been lost in fire. It had been finished there. He said he burned old paperwork. The smell said otherwise. The scent of scorched wax still hung in my uncle's living room, thick and acrid, like lies trying to disguise themselves as nostalgia. Luke stood by the fireplace, poker in hand, smiling in that uneasy way that made my skin crawl. "Didn't expect you to drop by this late, Caleb," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "You look tense. Everything all right?" I kept my eyes on the flames. "Depends," I said. "On what you're burning." He laughed, too loud, too forced. "Old tax files. Useless junk. You know how your granddad hoarded papers." But the ashes didn't look like tax forms. Beneath the gray curls of smoke, I saw the corner of something glossy, something that hadn't finished burning. I reached in with the poker, flipped it, and froze. A half-burned photograph, black and white, faded, but clear enough to make my pulse spike. Grandpa Jonas, Pastor Reed. Both were younger, smiling stiffly, shaking hands over a church safe. I stared at the image until the edges started curling in the heat. I grabbed it out with my bare hand, ignoring the sting. Luke's voice hardened. "That's private." So was Grandpa's will. He exhaled through his nose, the way he always did before lying. "Listen, Caleb. These old things don't matter. What matters is the family staying together. I'm willing to make things right between us." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Once all this drama dies down, we can talk about shares. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Quietly." My jaw tightened. "You mean by my silence?" His smile vanished. "You're chasing ghosts, boy. That will die with him." The words hit harder than he expected. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he tossed another paper into the fire and turned away, muttering, "Let the dead stay buried." But Grandpa wasn't buried, at least not the part of him that mattered. He was still here, in ashes and clues and whispers that refused to burn clean. I slipped the charred photo into my jacket and left before Luke could stop me. Outside, the night was sharp and windy, like the world itself wanted to breathe truth back into my lungs. The next morning, I went to Naomi Price, a local journalist who'd covered my grandfather's charity work years ago. She greeted me at the cafe with curious eyes and a cautious smile. "You look like a man carrying ghosts," she said. I handed her the photograph. "I need you to see what's underneath the burn marks." She scanned it into her laptop, adjusting brightness and contrast until the image cleared. The handshake came into focus. Behind them, etched on the front of the safe, were faint but legible numbers. Naomi squinted, then looked up at me slowly. "You're not going to believe this," she whispered. I leaned closer. "Try me." She zoomed in, enhancing the digits until the truth shone through the distortion. 3, 11, 19, the same pattern, the same code. I sat back, my pulse hammering. Grandpa hadn't left behind random clues. He'd built a trail, one that only someone who loved him enough to listen could follow. And I was just starting to hear the music. The combination was a hymn number. Faith had become arithmetic. I never thought I'd open a safe inside a church, but there I was, kneeling beneath the sanctuary floor with Naomi, flashlight trembling in my hand, the smell of damp wood thick around us. The undercroft had always been closed off to the public. Now I knew why. The safe was built into the wall, half swallowed by stone. The brass dial gleamed faintly in the beam of Naomi's light. "You really think this is it?" she whispered. I nodded. Grandpa didn't hide clues without purpose. 3, 11, 19, it's not just numbers. It's the hymn he used to play when the collection plate came back empty. "When grace fails, truth sings." She smiled nervously. "So you're betting your family's fortune on a song?" "On his faith," I said. I turned the dial, 3 clicks right, 11 left, 19 right. The lock snapped open with a sigh, like an old secret exhaling after holding its breath too long. Inside were folders, yellowed and brittle. Most were empty, their labels smudged with moisture. The dust inside hadn't been touched in years. But taped to the inner wall was something small and unexpected. A rusted key, its tag flaking with age. Naomi leaned in. "That can't be all." "It never is," I muttered. I peeled the key loose and turned it over in my hand. The faint engraving read, "Organ Bench Drawer." Before I could speak again, a sharp voice echoed from the stairwell. "Step away from that safe." We both turned. Pastor Reed stood at the bottom of the stairs, flashlight glaring into our faces. His expression wasn't anger. It was fear. "You shouldn't be here, Caleb," he said, his voice trembling. "You're digging in graves you don't understand." I stood, holding the key out toward him. "Then explain this." He stared at it, tears welling in his eyes before he even spoke. "Luke made me do it," he whispered. "He said it was to keep the peace. He took the will after the funeral and forced me to hide it here. Said no one would question a pastor." Naomi stepped forward. "Where is it now?" Reed shook his head. "He took it again. Months later. Said he'd burn it if anyone came looking." I felt something twist inside me, anger, betrayal, and pity all at once. "You lied at his grave, Pastor." Reed wiped his eyes. "Your grandfather was the only honest man I knew. I tried to protect his memory, not his fortune. Forgive me." But forgiveness wasn't what I came for. I slipped the key into my pocket and turned away. "If you want redemption," I said, "help me finish what he started." Naomi followed me up the stairs as thunder rolled outside, shaking the stained glass. The church groaned like it knew its secrets were about to surface. At the organ, I knelt by the bench, the one Grandpa used to sit on when the world got quiet. The key slid perfectly into the drawer's lock. It resisted for a moment, then clicked. The drawer slid open with a whisper, dust rising like incense. Inside was something round and wooden, a cassette cylinder, carved smooth, about the length of my hand. Naomi frowned. "What is that?" I held it up to the flickering candlelight. "It's a voice spool," I said softly. "From the 1950s, people used them before tapes." As the thunder cracked again, the cylinder rolled from my palm and onto the floor, spinning until it stopped at my feet, its faded label facing upward. Written across it in my grandfather's handwriting, "If you hear this, the truth has found you." When I heard his voice again, I forgot how to breathe. The old player whirred, gears turning like a heartbeat from another lifetime. I'd borrowed it from the local heritage museum that stored antique recorders and voice cylinders. Naomi sat beside me, her hands folded tight in her lap. The spool I'd found inside the organ bench rested on the turntable like something holy and fragile. The needle crackled. Then his voice. "Grandpa Jonas Warren. If you're hearing this," he said, his tone calm, steady, "you found the truth they buried under my music." My throat closed. I hadn't heard that voice in months, yet it hit me like he was standing right behind me. Naomi glanced at me but didn't speak. "They called it faith when they took what wasn't theirs," he continued. "They called it peace when they locked the truth away. But peace built on lies is just silence." The recording stuttered for a moment, then resumed. "To my true heir." Static erupted, drowning his words. I leaned closer, turning the dial, desperate to catch the name. Come on," I muttered. The static hissed louder until the speaker let out a painful screech. Then nothing. Naomi sighed. "The sound's corrupted. Maybe age, maybe heat." I shook my head. "No, that part was erased." We removed the cylinder from the player carefully. The wood casing was cracked on one side. I twisted it open gently to inspect the interior. Inside, something thin fluttered out, a pressed violet flower, perfectly preserved, its petals brittle but still carrying faint traces of color. Naomi frowned. "That's from a memorial bouquet." "Grandma's," I said instantly. He laid violet stems at her service every year. There was writing faintly visible along the edges of the inner casing, like someone had etched with a dull blade. I tried to read it, but it was too faint to see. Back at my workshop, I placed the petals and the casing under a UV inspection lamp. The dark room filled with a pale blue glow, and slowly the faint marks turned into glowing lines, letters and numbers hidden for decades. Naomi leaned in. "Coordinates?" I nodded, my pulse quickening. "Latitude, longitude. Looks like." She opened her phone, cross-checking the digits on a map. The pin dropped somewhere outside town. She zoomed in, eyes widening. "The old cemetery," she said softly. Near the oak tree. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. Grandpa had spent half his Sundays sitting under that tree after church. Said it helped him talk to God without witnesses. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Everything, every number, every note had been leading here. I packed the spool, the violet, and my flashlight. Naomi hesitated. You really think he hid something there? I don't think, I said, pocketing the coordinates. I know. As I turned off the light, the violet petals shimmered faintly under the dying glow, like they were whispering goodbye. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance, low and heavy, echoing like the sound of a buried secret waking up. Tomorrow, I'll go to that oak tree, and whatever waited beneath it would finally tell me what Grandpa couldn't finish saying. Even the dead keep secrets under roots. The cemetery was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ribs. The oak tree stood at the far end of the graveyard, tall and gnarled, its branches twisting into the sky like it had been waiting for me. The soil beneath it was soft, still damp from last night's storm. I knelt with my flashlight wedged between my teeth and started digging with my hands first, then with a small spade. The smell of wet earth filled the air, cold, metallic, alive. Naomi waited a few feet back, her umbrella barely holding against the drizzle. "How sure are you?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just kept digging until metal scraped against the blade. My heart jumped. Carefully, I brushed away the dirt until I saw it. A metal lunchbox, the kind Grandpa used to carry when he worked construction. It was wrapped in an old piece of cloth, faded and frayed. I lifted it onto the grass, hands shaking. Naomi crouched beside me as I peeled back the cloth and opened the box. Inside were a few rusted coins, a church bulletin from decades ago, and one envelope wrapped in plastic. Inside that envelope was a bank bond certificate, and across the bottom, in clear, bold type, the words, "Beneficiary." C. W. Naomi gasped. "That's you, Caleb." My throat tightened. I stared at my initials, written in ink older than I was. "He really did leave it to me," I whispered. Before I could say another word, a voice cut through the rain. "Step away from the box." I turned. Carla stood behind us, soaked, mascara bleeding down her face. Beside her was Uncle Luke, his coat collar pulled high, his expression cold and familiar. "Family heirlooms belong to family," Luke said flatly. "This is mine," I said. "Grandpa chose—" "He chose wrong," Carla hissed, and in that second, she lunged. Naomi shouted, but the mud was slick, and before I knew it, Luke's boot pinned my wrist. He snatched the lunchbox from the ground, his face twisted with anger and greed. "Stop!" I yelled. "That's evidence." "Evidence of nothing," Luke barked. "You think a piece of paper changes who earned this family's legacy?" Rain lashed down harder, turning the soil into sludge. I tried to grab the box again, but he shoved me back, my shoulders slamming against the tree trunk. Naomi screamed his name, but Luke and Carla were already running, splashing through the puddles, clutching the box like a treasure chest. I stumbled to my feet, chest heaving. "They won't get far," I said through my teeth. "Not with that storm coming." Naomi looked at me, fear flashing in her eyes. "What now?" I wiped the mud from my hands, my mind racing. "That bond? Something's missing." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I replayed the image in my head, the certificate's corner torn clean off. "There was a piece missing," I said quietly. "Bottom right. It looked like someone cut it away." "And?" I stared back toward the church steeple visible through the rain. "Grandpa's organ," I murmured. "He never left anything incomplete. If he hid one part of his truth underground—" Naomi followed my gaze. "Then the rest is still inside the church." Lightning flashed across the clouds, lighting the oak like a monument. The wind howled through its branches, scattering leaves over the hole I'd dug, as if the tree itself wanted to bury its secret again. But I wasn't done, not yet, because the missing piece wasn't gone. It was waiting to be played. It played again, but this time I knew who was listening. The rain came down in silver sheets, hammering the roof of the church as thunder shook the windows. I parked outside under the crooked streetlight, my headlights cutting through the fog like two tired eyes. Naomi had begged me to wait until morning, but I couldn't. The truth wasn't something I could sleep beside. Inside, the church was black except for the faint glow from the sanctuary lamps. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. I closed the door behind me, the sound echoing like a seal being broken. The organ sat silent at first, grand, hollow, and patient. Then lightning flashed and the power flickered. A split second later, the organ roared to life. Keys pressing themselves, pipes breathing out the same haunting hymn my grandfather used to play every Sunday. When grace fails, truth sings. I stood frozen, rain dripping from my jacket. The sound was deafening and beautiful and wrong all at once. The same note that had started this entire nightmare reverberated through the church, shaking the floor beneath me. I climbed onto the bench, pulled open the top panel, and peered inside. The pipes rattled with every note, light flickering off their metal edges. Something glimmered inside the third pipe from the left. A small, wax-sealed scrap caught in the vibration. I grabbed a flashlight, wedged my arm deep inside, and pulled it free. It was a fragment of the bank bond. Edges burned, sealed with melted wax identical to the kind from Grandpa's letters. I turned it over and felt my breath catch. The torn edge matched perfectly with the missing corner from the certificate Luke had stolen. My chest tightened. "You left it here," I whispered. "You knew I'd come back." Then a deafening crack split the air, and lightning struck the church steeple, plunging everything into darkness. The organ's lights flickered violently before dying out. Sparks burst from its wiring, smoke curling through the air. I dove behind the pews as the storm raged above. When the thunder finally quieted, I stood, coughing through the haze. The organ was silent again, but the jolt had shaken something loose. One of the wooden side panels hung crooked, a faint glow pulsing behind it, just the reflection of my flashlight. I pulled the panel free, and there it was, a false compartment, carved perfectly into the organ's frame. Inside lay a small cylinder of parchment, rolled tight and sealed with a thick layer of crimson wax. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The parchment was dry, preserved from decades of storms, carrying the faint scent of cedar and candle smoke. My heart pounded as I held it up to the flickering light from a half-broken candle near the altar. The seal bore my grandfather's initials, J. W. I broke it open slowly, praying the words would finally set everything right. The handwriting was neat, familiar, and heartbreakingly human. It began with his standard blessing, "To those I leave behind." And then for a moment I could almost hear his voice reading it aloud. But when I reached the final line, the air in my lungs turned to stone. 2 signatures rested at the bottom: Jonas Warren, Luke Warren. The candle flame sputtered in the draft, casting their names in shadow. Grandpa hadn't written this alone, and maybe, just maybe, he hadn't died believing Luke was the villain after all. They called me a liar until the judge played the tape. By the time the hearing began, the church's name had become a headline, and my grandfather's hymn had become evidence. Naomi had published the voice recording online that morning, Jonas Warren's voice echoing through courtroom speakers across America. The clip spread like wildfire. If you're hearing this, you found the truth they buried under my music. Now it was official. The probate hearing had turned into a trial of blood. Luke sat across from me, a smirk carved into his face like he'd already won. His lawyer, a polished man in a navy suit, flipped through the supposed will I'd found inside the organ. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this document bears 2 signatures, Jonas Warren and Luke Warren. It proves joint consent. My client didn't steal the inheritance. He shared it." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Warren, your response?" I stood, the weight of months pressing on my shoulders. "That will was forged," I said evenly. "Luke added his name after my grandfather's death." The courtroom murmured. Luke leaned back, crossing his arms. "You think anyone's going to believe that, Caleb? Grandpa trusted me. You were just the sentimental handyman." Naomi shot me a small nod from the back row. That was my cue. I walked to the evidence table and picked up the engraved fountain pen, the one marked property of J.W. "This pen," I said, holding it up for the judge, "was used to sign both names. But there's something Luke didn't know." I opened a folder Naomi had helped prepare, a professional ink pattern analysis from a forensics lab. The document displayed 2 microscopic images side by side, one from Jonas's signature on an old donation slip, and one from the disputed will. Jonas's writing used natural hand pressure, I explained. But Luke's imitation pressed too hard, leaving microbreaks in the ink flow. The lab confirmed both names were written with the same pen, weeks apart. Luke's smirk faltered. The judge leaned forward. "Are you saying your uncle signed this after your grandfather's death?" "Yes, Your Honor, and I can prove Jonas never intended that partnership." Naomi stepped up, handing me another exhibit, a church donation stub, dated the day before Jonas died. I passed it to the clerk, my voice steady. This was his final act. He donated his remaining savings to establish a scholarship fund in my name. The judge read the stub aloud. "Beneficiary, Caleb Warren Trust for Youth Education." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My chest tightened not from pride but from grief. Grandpa had left me something far greater than money. Luke slammed his hand on the table. "That doesn't mean anything. He wanted us both to manage it." I looked at him, calm but cold. Then why hide it? Why burn the evidence? Why forge his name? He didn't answer. The silence was louder than any denial. The judge raised a hand, signaling for quiet. "This court will conduct a full forensic review of both documents," he said. "We reconvene at dawn for a final ruling." Dawn. The word lingered like a promise. The truth had spent months buried under dust, greed, and hymns. But by sunrise, it would either set me free or bury me with the lies. Luke's lawyer whispered frantically as bailiffs cleared the room. Naomi touched my shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. I shook my head. Not yet. Because one last echo still haunted me. The organ's hymn, faint and unfinished, waiting for its final note at sunrise. When the verdict came, the organ played one last time. The morning light poured through the courthouse windows like forgiveness. My palms were slick with sweat as the judge shuffled through the documents, her voice calm but heavy. "This court finds the second signature fraudulent," she said. "The valid will, signed solely by Jonas Warren, is hereby recognized and executed under full legal standing. The estate shall transfer to its rightful heir, Caleb Warren." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the sound of the gavel cracked through the air like thunder after a long drought. Naomi exhaled beside me, her hand gripping my arm. Across the room, Luke sat pale and motionless, his lawyer whispering frantic words he no longer heard. Carla was already in tears, mascara streaking down her face. Two officers approached quietly, their badges catching the morning light. Luke finally spoke, his voice low and bitter. "You think you've won, Caleb?" I looked at him, not in triumph, but in something closer to mercy. "No," I said. I just stopped losing. He was led away, his cuffed hands trembling. Pastor Reed stood in the back row, eyes wet, his collar hanging loose around his neck. When the courtroom emptied, he approached me slowly. "I'm stepping down," he said, voice cracked. "I preached truth while hiding sin. Your grandfather deserved better." I nodded. "Then make it right. Help me rebuild what's left." He smiled weakly. "You sound like him." 2 weeks later, the church stood bathed in sunlight again. Scaffolding lined its walls, and workers hammered new beams into place. The faded cross above the altar gleamed with a fresh coat of gold paint. The Jonas Warren Community Trust sign hung proudly on the front lawn, its letters carved deep into oak. That trust wasn't just money. It was a promise. Funds from the inheritance were already being used to restore the building, open youth scholarships, and rebuild the same organ that had carried his secrets. I stood alone in the sanctuary, the scent of varnish and candle wax mixing in the air. Light streamed through the repaired stained glass, scattering colors across the floor. I ran my fingers along the newly polished organ keys, their surface cool and familiar. "Grandpa built this place to heal people," I said quietly. "Maybe he built me for the same reason." I pressed one key, just one, and the organ answered. A single low note, warm and alive, filled the room. Then another joined it, soft and unprompted, as if invisible hands played along. The same hymn, "When grace fails, truth sings." I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me. For the first time in months, I didn't hear guilt or ghosts, just peace. Outside, the bell tower chimed noon. Naomi stepped through the doorway, smiling. "Sounds like he's still proud of you." "Maybe," I said, smiling back. "Or maybe he just wanted the song to finally end." The last note lingered in the air long enough to feel like goodbye. Justice doesn't echo. It endures. Money fades, but integrity keeps playing long after the music stops. Subscribe for more stories of hidden justice, family betrayal, and truth that refuses to stay buried.